Well, hello everyone. The other day I asked on twitter.com whether I should review Dinesh D'Souza's new documentary 2000 Mules, and damn did I get a lot of reception. A whole lot of yes, 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 please, yes, please. But there were a few people in the comments saying, Lauren, I don't know. I think you're just going to fully agree with the narrative. I think you're going to simp for the voter fraud story. Why would we want just one more person circle jerking this movie? Now, I'm writing this intro before actually watching the film, and the truth is, I've never been totally convinced of the voter fraud theory to begin with, that many of my colleagues and viewers believe. I've said so publicly many times that I don't know if there is proof for mass voter fraud. So, the idea that I'm going to just watch this film uncritically and simp for Dinesh is ridiculous. I like the guy. I think he does interesting work, but I'm going into this with a critical mind and also the mind of someone who has made a few documentaries myself, so I will probably throw in some creative and structural reactions as well. What I liked, what I didn't, what I may have done differently if it were my own film. But anyways, let's get to the movie. We're going to jump right into it after a huge thank you from today's sponsor, Noble Gold. Over the years, you've probably tried different investments in stocks and mutual funds, so you know they can be volatile and unpredictable. But with inflation running at its highest rate for 40 years, do you really want volatility and uncertainty? Being able to sleep at night knowing your investment isn't about to crash is worth its weight in gold. And speaking of gold, if you've been jumping from one investment idea to the next, a gold IRA with Noble Gold is perfect for you. A reliable hedge against inflation just fell in our laps with gold. You shield your gains from taxes, you keep the real value of your wealth, you own a global asset, something tangible, and you can help protect your wealth against an economic crash. What is not to like? And this month, for every IRA above 20K, you'll get an incredible 3-ounce silver American Virtue coin, completely free as a thank you. Call 877-646-5347 now to find out more or visit noblegoldinvestments.com. That's noblegoldinvestments.com. Okay, welcome back. Obviously, massive disclaimer, there's going to be spoilers. We're going to have clips from start to finish this film, so if you haven't seen it, I've linked the website below, and if you don't want to see it and you just want to watch my review, well, hopefully I'll offer a good enough synopsis for you. Let's get into Act 1. Boom. Just going into this, the intro, music, graphics, all very impressive, all very well done. Making dissident movies is not an easy task. Well, I know Dinesh would have had a much bigger funding pool than I have had for my films. I don't know if it would have been anything near mainstream media budgets, which are literally in the millions and millions of dollars to get high production value like this. Meanwhile, my dumbass is having to couch surf in South Africa to try to get my films to this quality while still being within budget. I swear I'm not bitter. I'm not bitter. And here's the thing as well. Even if you have a good budget for dissident films, finding people with the talent and willingness to make them is so hard. The creative sphere was totally co-opted by leftists, partially thanks to the right wing's consistent messaging that we should all just abandon the arts and become tradies, right? But all this is to say, I'm always impressed when a filmmaker outside the mainstream is able to get decent production quality. As for the actual content, part 1 of the film lays out the basic dilemma in America post-election. One side believed the election was stolen and there was mass voter fraud. The other side believed the election was the most secure in American history, and not only that, but believe in the censoring and shutting down of those who question the election's security, as they view their questioning as dangerous to American democracy. To which Dinesh makes a salient point that, okay, you can think that, but can we really move on and just vote again if a solid portion of the population genuinely believe our elections are not fair? Or if people at the very least don't know what happened.
It was a primal scream.
To protect the Constitution of the United States against enemies, foreign and domestic!
They wanted their elected leaders to adjudicate the claims of election fraud.
After proposing this question that the documentary is going to answer, the American people are divided and want answers. Is this a big lie? Is it a lie at all? Dinesh sits down with various large Republican figures such as Charlie Kirk, Dennis Prager, Larry Elder, Sebastian Gorka, etc., and asks them if they think the election was stolen. The majority, at the very least, express some very serious doubts about its legitimacy.
Let me begin by asking a very simple question. Do we feel confident or comfortable that we know the truth about what really happened in the 2020 election?
This whole scene is a fairly good build-up to show it's not just some fringe weirdos saying they have suspicions about the election, but there are actual politicians and people with large platforms who have serious doubts. And more so, in this scene, they establish how Democrats may morally justify cheating in the election. What would be their reasoning?
If I believed the president were a Nazi, I might steal an election.
If we were Germans in
Yes.
the 1930s, we'd steal the
Yes.
election from Hitler if we could.
If I'm that indoctrinated, of course I can justify it.
At this point, we have yet to get to any evidence that the election was stolen, just this kind of setup as to where the suspicions arise. And I will say, even though he's obviously picked a bunch of right-wingers to be on this panel with him, I respect that Dinesh left Prager and Larry Elder in there, challenging the narrative of the film, saying they aren't really sure if there's enough evidence yet.
They won. Why didn't they cheat on all of those? Why didn't they cheat in Virginia with Youngkin?
But I think the reason that many Republicans are saying let's move on is because bold accusations require bold evidence, and they haven't seen it.
Okay, Act 2. There's no acts in this film. I'm just randomly saying that. I don't know what I'm doing. So after this little right-wing shindig, we start to get into the real investigation, where Dinesh and his wife meet with Catherine Engelbrecht. If you follow this channel lots, you know I pronounce everything wrong. She runs a group called True the Vote, and they're meeting with her and a private investigator she's working with to look into the 2020 election results. Dinesh does something very smart here, in that he opens the segment by verifying Engelbrecht's bipartisan status, having her and the investigator lay out that it's not just Democrats that try to rig elections, but Republicans too, pointing to Republican candidate in North Carolina, Mark Harris, who had his 2018 election overturned due to fraud. And this is completely true. In fact, his staffers were arrested and charged with illegal ballot handling, perjury, and more. So not only is this a great way for Dinesh to set up his interview subjects as being bipartisan, he's now pointed to a real case where election fraud has occurred in America to show that, no, this happening is not that insane of an idea, people.
All kinds of vote harvesting, and he learned the strategy. Then he broke with them. And he took his services to Mark Harris, a Republican, well, actually a pastor who was running.
Correct.
And Harris won. He pulled it off.
While watching, I wasn't really sure where this was going, but Phillips, the private investigator, began describing what geo-tracking technology is, so phone tracking, and began explaining how it had been used various times to make arrests on January 6th for tracking terrorists, just how important and legitimate digital footprint tracking is.
There's 300,000 or so apps that gather that data, and then they sell it to brokers.
Isn't it also true that this geo-tracking has now become a vital tool for the military, for the intelligence agencies, and for law enforcement?
Indeed, they're using it almost every day.
And then eventually you find out they're bringing it up because this is going to be a key component of how they're going to poke holes in the 2020 election's reliability. I like that. I like a film that kind of leads you into the story.
Let's talk about the methodology. You identified data in certain places, and by and large you focused on the states where the election was decided. Tell us, what are the areas that you bought data for, and what were you looking for? And what's the time period?
October 1st through the election. In Georgia, we actually bought from October 1st through January 6th after the runoff.
So him and True the Vote state they had purchased significant amounts of geo-tracking data from October 1st to January 6th. So people's cell phone data all throughout election time. And in the first analysis, they focused on the Atlanta metro area and narrowed down all cell phone location data of any individual who had been to ballot boxes more than 10 times during that voting period. This is obviously very strange behavior. Why would you need to go to the ballot boxes even twice, let alone 10 times, right? He then claims in Atlanta alone, they had 242 people doing this, traveling directly from ballot box to ballot box to ballot box over 10 times. And these individuals they call mules, obviously because they believe they are illegally trafficking ballots that are fake. I mean, we're not even half an hour into the film yet, and this is like a nuclear bomb of a claim, right? Why would people need to visit these ballot boxes that many times? Very suspicious behavior. And while I was gonna wait until the end, I couldn't help myself. Midway through the film, I decided to go and check out the debunks available because I was pretty mind blown by this information they were putting forward. And I wanted to be very intentional about watching it with a critical mind. And this was one of those claims that seemed so big if true, so to speak, that I decided to go open up the PolitiFact write-up and check out what all the fact checkers had to say. I can't say I was particularly impressed by them. The fact check begins by trying to poison you against Dinesh by saying he has a bad history with the truth. I don't care. I don't care. CNN has a bad history with the truth. Fact-checking websites have a bad history with the truth. That doesn't mean every single thing they say is a lie. So please, forget about the fluff. Get to the point. Show me where the falsehoods are in this information. And unfortunately, it seems they needed the preamble to this fact check because their debunks of this phone tracking claim were dubious at best. D'Souza's argument ignores that in many states, it is legal to drop off a ballot on behalf of another voter, which is especially helpful for voters with disabilities or the elderly. Critics of this practice call it ballot harvesting, while election administrators typically use other terms such as ballot collection. In 31 states, someone other than the voter, often a family member or designated person, is allowed to return a completed ballot on behalf of another voter. Sure, this is important information to know, but I also just don't find it that convincing, because assuming this phone data is correct, we're talking about people who have gone to 10 separate boxes 10 plus times. Unless you're Amish, most people don't have 10 plus family members in the first place, certainly not ones they're living with or are close enough with to be dropping off their mail for. And let's say someone who works at a care home, why would they need to go to a bunch of separate boxes? Why wouldn't they just go to one? And you know what? I assure you, if it's all the Amish people, they probably aren't making 10 separate trips into the city to submit each individual's ballot at different times, right? It just wasn't, this fact check wasn't really adding up to me, so I was left wanting. But the next debunk claims such geospatial data is not precise enough to prove without uncertainty that a person submitted a ballot to a drop box, only that they came within a short distance of it, the Associated Press reported. There are many reasons why a person might repeatedly enter the zone where a drop box is stationed, as the boxes are often strategically placed in busy areas. I found this debunk or explanation a little more compelling than the first one because it is true, despite the cell phone data abnormalities, we don't know if they were there casting a ballot. We don't know who they were casting it for. These could have been a bunch of illegal votes for Trump. And something like this wouldn't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this cell phone data was proof of voter fraud. But I think it certainly, at the very least, brings up some questions. The PolitiFact article states that it is conspiracist thinking to ask questions about why, around election season, you had thousands of people returning to ballot boxes dozens of times. To me, personally, I'd say it's more conspiracist thinking to entirely dismiss this and not want to investigate further at all, because it is weird. But anyways, moving on. I love when a movie does this. I'll ask a question and then it'll answer it for me like a minute later. And that question I had in my head was, how do we know that these are Biden supporters? And the investigator makes the intriguing point that many of the phones whose cell phone data showed mule behavior also happened to appear at Antifa riots and protests, obviously building on their point that, you know what? We think these are probably more radical left-wing activists that are putting in votes against Trump.
There's an organization that tracks the device IDs across all violent protests around the world. We took a look at our 242 mules in Atlanta, and sure enough, dozens and dozens and dozens of our mules show up on the ACLID databases.
I have to admit, even going in being deliberately skeptical, I was pretty mind blown watching this. And a lot of these things, it's difficult to just hand wave away as coincidences, right? But I will put an important caveat here. They have not released the phone data yet to be independently reviewed or verified. Even PolitiFact acknowledged themselves that it's hard for them to evaluate the claims when the information isn't public. However, True the Vote have said they will apparently be releasing their findings in the coming weeks. Until then, I do hope that Dinesh took a look at the cell phone data himself before putting this all in the film, of course. That is something I know I would do while working on a documentary like this. I've interviewed lots of traffickers. I just interviewed a cartel member a few months ago for my latest film coming out. And of course, I had them show me footage, routes, proof of their cartel activities before proceeding with the interview, assuming, they were just telling the truth. So I know that's what I would do. I hope Dinesh has verified and observed all of this data himself, because it would obviously be super embarrassing if for some reason it was discovered that the cell phone data did not actually show what these two are saying it shows. I will be waiting anxiously for that. All right, Act 3. There's still no acts in this film. I don't care. At this point, they begin to do a state-by-state count using the phone data, saying they found 200 mules in Phoenix, 100 in Milwaukee, 500 in Michigan, and holy shit, 1,100 mules in Philadelphia alone, which was obviously an important region for the election. But here's the thing. Up until this point, we're just kind of left here having to believe everything the two interview subjects are saying. They haven't really shown us anything to confirm it, other than some fancy graphics outlining what they're saying. But at about 35 minutes in, they state they actually have video evidence to back up the mule theory linked to the phone data. And there's no denying the footage looks suspicious as hell, especially if they have phone data linked to this guy going to multiple boxes, right? But for now, this can still be dismissed by detractors as, oh, this dude is dropping off ballots for a household. This guy is, works for a care home or something. Even though some of the clips, they are showing people doing this at like 3 a.m. Who does that? It's weird. It's weird, okay? One thing I will say though, looking at this with as critical a mind as possible, is I was kind of expecting them to show the cell phone data linked to the people they had on footage and then show them going to multiple boxes, right? So show the tracing along the city path from hot point to hot point to hot point, and then show footage of the same car, the same guy or gal, showing up to another box. That would be really damning, right? A handful of ballots at 2 separate boxes on footage. But they didn't do that. They didn't include that, which to me, if they have acquired this thousands of hours of video footage and they have thousands of these mules to pull from, I feel like they should have at least been able to find some, if not one, of the same person at 2 separate ballot box locations on footage. That doesn't seem like an absurd request given the claims being made. So that is my one hypercritical point here. Maybe they do have that footage, but didn't get around to including it in the documentary. I don't know. That's one point of curiosity I would have. They should have something like that. They should. Fast forward, Dinesh asks these two whether they think the election was fair, and they essentially say they believe it was rigged. And then 48 minutes in, they start crunching the numbers of how this would have impacted the election if their theory about these mules is true. Once again, they are doing this math assuming all of the cell phone data is correct and assuming all the video footage, in fact, is of people illegally voting. I still think they probably need to do more verification there, because if there's even 1 or 2 videos they included in this documentary where it is someone submitting votes for their family members, a care home or something, and they recognize themselves and can prove it, that's going to do a lot of damage to the narrative of this film, even if the rest of it is totally true. Now, if no one comes forward in that capacity and all the data is real, then these calculations they're about to do become even more damning than all the rest of this stuff in this movie, right? Dinesh does something very clever here as well. When he adds up the numbers, he admits that there are still states Trump would have lost, even if you take away all the hypothetical fake votes for Biden, showing nuance in the film, which is important for it to be believable. You never want to watch a movie where every counterpoint to the narrative is just completely ignored and covered up, right? That's a stupid movie. You're watching propaganda. However, overall, he still makes the bold claim that without the illegal ballots, True the Vote are alleging, Trump would have won the states of Georgia, Arizona, and Pennsylvania, putting him back in the White House. And then he claims this is a conservative estimate, and Trump may have won a landslide if you look at all the potential illegal voting. Bam! Return to our crew of conservatives from the start. Prager, Elder, etc. I like the way this was done, starting the film with their opinions on the issue and then getting their reactions to the evidence they've collected throughout the investigative process. Solid move by Dinesh. The only thing I would have done differently here is I would have had a mixed room. Some Democrats, leftists, conservatives, libertarians in there. I think that would have been a more compelling conversation and reaction. But still, like the way this was done.
Yes, right. This is their pattern of life. So in one night, this person, this mule, went across 6 counties to 27 different drop boxes, 5 different organizations.
So he was getting the ballots from the organization.
Correct.
So, yeah.
Okay, here we go again. Turning back on the hypercritical mind. They state again here, this specific mule went to 6 counties and 27 different drop boxes in one night. I just don't understand why they don't show that footage. Wouldn't they have some footage of at least one more of those 27 other ballot boxes with the same guy visiting? Because right now, all of this is just super compelling, super suspicious, but showing footage of the same guy at separate boxes with more ballots in hand in a different county would be a nail in the coffin. So why wouldn't they show that? I know they state some of the cameras were down in some counties, but they only show one email from one county claiming this. And perhaps the rest of the evidence they had for this got left on the cutting room floor. Lord knows I have sat there having to cut up documentaries with time constraints myself, and it is not an easy task. Tons of context gets left on the cutting room floor just because otherwise your film is going to be like 10 hours, right? So I don't know. Maybe they do have this footage. I would love to see it. This is my one little nitpick that my brain can't let go of because I know if I were making this film, that would be something I'd be searching for and wanting to put in it. But anyways, moving on. Toward the end, Dinesh does a few interviews with blurred whistleblowers. Obviously, I get having to blur people. I've done this many times in my own films with human traffickers and migrants. But every claim made by the people I blur in my films is typically independently verifiable aside from the blurred individual. In this case, when talking about rigging the US election, ballot fraud, etc., I'm less interested in the stories of anonymous people because even though I'm not saying they're lying, with an issue as contentious as this, the evidence provided has to be so freaking solid, right? There's already so much doubt around the issue. So I think the phone data and the videos are far more compelling. Although Dinesh does bring in Hans von Spakovsky, a former member of the Federal Election Commission, to say, hey, these anonymous sources you've got, their stories are something we've seen before. So there's that. That was well done. The last bit of the documentary, they then go over the money involved, where they think it's coming from, and how the interview subjects think people would get involved with funding these meals, how the whole process would work. There was nothing there that I found like atrociously false or to be a massive smoking gun. It's all interesting and compelling information. So I'm just going to skip that bit and jump to the end conclusion Dinesh gets to, where he says, we must now face the chilling reality that the Democrats rigged and stole the 2020 election.
They rigged and stole the 2020 presidential election. We cannot be okay with this.
Massive ending claim there from Dinesh. And don't get me wrong, he has provided some very compelling information. Fantastic investigation. This is obviously the best work done on election fraud in 2020. But I personally cannot sign off on that message just yet until the cell phone data and footage is independently verified or made public for people to analyze and critique. And you guys can call me an idiot, you can call me cucked, whatever you want for saying that. But I mean, if it's all true, obviously I hope the data comes out, is verified and investigated, duh. And apparently True the Vote are in the process of releasing it. So I have no qualms about saying, let's wait, I'm gonna wait and take a look, Because only two things can happen from that approach. One, I waited for that information to go out and I get to say, holy, you've exposed insane amounts of voter fraud. Like, that's amazing. Or I get to say, wow, I'm really glad I waited for it to be released because it's not quite showing what we thought it was. So I don't really have any qualms at all about, waiting and verifying. I think that's a pretty reasonable approach. But overall, whether you think this film is crazy propaganda, whether you think it is the most important investigation of our lifetime, it was extremely well done. I give props to Dinesh D'Souza, his wife, and everyone who worked on it. I think he brings up a really important and worthwhile skepticism in people. There is a reason a lot of Americans believe the election was rigged. Left-wing or right-wing, I've heard lefties cite a million times that age-old quote, if voting made a difference, they wouldn't let us do it. Concerns about the legitimacy of elections have existed well before this Trump 2020 election. And people who have them are not just insane. They're not just inventing the concept of voter fraud, right? The question is obviously to what degree, to what extent, and can mass voter fraud being alleged in this documentary be verified and perhaps even legally acted on? It never should have been characterized by the media and political class as a matter of the election is either 100% fair or you're a conspiracy theorist. This is an absurd dichotomy that runs counter to reality. So a big thank you to Dinesh D'Souza for making this film. It is no easy task, I know. I was really impressed with all the animation, interviews, the creative choices. I'm still left with some questions, but we'll be awaiting diligently to see what comes of the information uncovered here. And as for everyone watching, I hope you can see I put in a deliberate effort to be critical, to find flaws, but also fair to this film and what it is. That's all I ask for of people who watch my movies as well. I can always appreciate a compliment more from a critical viewer because I know they're trying to find flaws. And so when they say something nice about the film, that means it was genuinely something that impressed them, not just a default compliment, right? But if you want to go watch this film for yourself, you can go check it out in the description below. And I appreciate you all. Man, I need to sleep. Have a good one.